All right, welcome. Today we're digging into something really fascinating, autism research. You've got two of the closest neighbors on the planet, Canada and the US, but when it comes to this topic, they are taking wildly different approaches to support the autistic community. So let's get into what that looks like and what it all means.
And that's really the big question we're tackling today. I mean, these two countries share so much, right? A border, tons of culture, they even work together on science all the time. But their game plans for autism? Totally different. We're talking different priorities, different research, even different political fights. It's like two different philosophies playing out right next to each other. So let's break it all down.
Okay, so where do we even start? Well, maybe with the most basic question of all. Who are we even counting? And you know what? The answer is totally different depending on which side of that border you're standing on. And this one little difference, it tells you everything about their priorities right out of the gate. So up in Canada, they've made this really big move recently to fill a huge hole in their data. Their latest models are showing that about 1 in 55 Canadian adults are autistic. This is a huge deal because for decades, the focus was almost entirely on kids. They're finally looking at a whole generation that was basically invisible in the data before. But then you look south to the US, and it's a completely different story. The CDC there has just doubled down on what they've always done. Focus on kids. Their latest numbers point to 1 in 31 children being autistic, and that number keeps going up. So their approach is absolutely laser-focused on tracking and figuring out what's happening with the youngest generation.
You know, the source material we're drawing from puts this pretty bluntly, and with a bit of a laugh. It says, Canada is finally counting the grown-ups, while the US is saying, forget adults, kids are multiplying faster than TikTok dance trends. I mean, that really nails it, doesn't it? Canada's playing catch-up with adults, while the US is all in on the rising numbers in kids. Completely different problems leading to completely different starting points.
Meet Harper, a bright, curious young girl with autism. Harper doesn't just hear the world, she hears everything. Sometimes, sounds feel too loud. But what if that sensitive hearing was actually a superpower? When her neighbor's kitten goes missing, Harper discovers she can hear what others can't. I hear him, this way. Follow Harper's incredible journey, where being different becomes her greatest strength. My hearing is my superpower, a heartwarming tale of courage, kindness, and celebrating what makes us unique.
So if you're counting different people, it makes sense that you'd start looking for causes in different ways, right? And that's exactly what we see. Both countries are digging into genetics and the environment to understand the origins of autism. But, you guessed it, they're looking in totally different places. Okay, quick science detour before we dive into the nitty-gritty. We need to talk about de novo mutations. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Think of them as brand new genetic typos. They just pop up in an individual for the first time. They're not inherited from either parent. And this is a huge focus for researchers in both countries, so it's good to know what it means. All right, so with that in mind, check out how different their genetic hunts are. Canadian researchers have made a name for themselves mapping these big, large-scale genetic changes. We're talking huge chunks of DNA that are either missing or copied, called CNVs. But in the US, they're using a microscope, zooming way in on tiny, subtle changes in what people used to call junk DNA. Turns out, that so-called junk DNA acts like a bunch of on-off switches for our genes, and it's super important.
And this leads to a perfect analogy, honestly. It's like they're both playing a game of DNA Jenga. Canada is looking at the big structural blocks, the CNVs, to see what happens when you pull one out. Meanwhile, the US is looking at those tiny, delicate pieces, the non-coding variants, to see which ones make the whole tower wobble. You really need both perspectives to see the whole picture. But, you know, it's not all just about what's happening inside ourselves. It's also about the world around us. And in Canada, the research on this is fascinating. They've found links between things like prenatal air pollution and a higher risk for autism. But on the flip side, they've also found that living in neighborhoods with more green space actually seems to have a protective effect. Pretty amazing, right? Now, head back down to the US, and they're looking at a totally different kind of environment, the one that's literally inside our own bodies. A massive area of research there is the whole gut-brain connection. Scientists are trying to figure out how the trillions of tiny microbes in our gut, that's our microbiome, are talking to the brain, and how that might affect things like emotions and sensory processing for autistic people.
So you could boil it all down to this one simple, kind of funny line. Canadian therapy is a hike, US therapy is probiotics. Look, obviously it's a massive oversimplification, but it kind of gets the point across, right? Canada's looking outside at things like parks and air quality, while the US is looking inside at gut health.
All right, so we've talked about who's being counted and the search for causes. But what about helping people right now? What about practical solutions? Well, this is where we get into the tools and therapies being developed, and no surprise here, we see another really clear split in how they're going about it. Canada seems to be going all in on technology. We're talking about things like AI-powered learning platforms and even using virtual reality headsets to help people practice social skills in a safe space. The US is also using tech, especially AI for diagnostics, but a huge amount of their effort is going into medicine, into pharmaceutical interventions. For example, they're running big clinical trials for a drug called leucovorin, hoping it might help improve language skills. And again, our source material has a great way of summing this up. Canada's strapping on a VR headset, while the US is saying, "Here, take 2 leucovorins and call me in the morning." It's funny, but it really gets at the two different philosophies here. Canada is betting on tech tools to build skills and aid learning. The US is exploring medical pathways to see if they can address some of the core characteristics. Okay, let's zoom all the way out now to the big picture, national strategy. How does all this science and all these different priorities actually turn into government policy? This is where things get really, really different, not just in the outcome, but in the whole process.
Starting back in 2022, Canada began this process of building a national autism strategy. And their whole approach is built around one word, collaboration. What's really crucial here is that it includes Indigenous-led consultations. The goal is to make the policy distinctions-based, which is a way of saying it has to respect the totally unique cultures and needs of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. The whole vibe is, let's build this together.
In the US, the conversation is different. It's dominated by a really controversial idea, creating a national autism registry that would use private health data. Now, the people who support it say, hey, this would be an incredible tool for research. But the critics are sounding major alarms about privacy. And on top of that, a lot of scientists are worried it would just be a huge distraction, and maybe even stir up old debunked myths that we've all worked so hard to move past. And this last quote just perfectly captures the two different political scenes. It says, Canada is co-writing policy hand in hand with Indigenous communities. The US is debating who should even hold the pen. Man, that's sharp. It paints such a clear picture. Canada's process is all about building from the ground up, together. Meanwhile, the US is stuck in this top-down debate, arguing about the very first step. So let's put it all together in one place. You can really see the pattern here. When it comes to data, it's adults versus children. For genetics, it's big picture copy number variations versus tiny so-called junk DNA variants. For the environment, it's green spaces and air versus the gut-brain connection. For interventions, it's tech-driven tools versus pharma-driven drugs. And for national policy, it's collaboration versus controversy. It really is a tale of two completely different roadmaps. So what does this all mean? In the end, you've got two major countries asking fundamentally different questions and trying out completely different solutions. It's not about one being right and one being wrong. They're just distinct. And it leaves us with a huge question. Which of these ideas, or maybe a combination of them or something totally new, is going to be the thing that defines the future of autism support, not just for them, but for everyone, everywhere?